From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
We are into week 6 of seemingly stalled budget negotiations in Lansing.
6 weeks past the July 1st statutory budget deadline.
6 weeks with K through 12 schools, higher ed, and some local governments without any idea of how much state funding they'll receive in a fiscal year that for them has already begun.
So, where do things stand at the state capitol?
Well, let's turn to Colin Jackson, Capitol reporter at the Michigan Public Radio Network, and Elena Dernbaugh, assistant editor at Gongwer News Service, for some answers. Hey, you two.
Hello.
Hey, Zoe.
Elena, this law, this statutory July 1st deadline was adopted in response to government shutdowns that happened in the early 2000s. It's largely worked since then. What is failing in this go-round?
That's a great question. So in conversations with folks currently involved in this budget process on the House Republican side, namely Speaker Matt Hall and Appropriations Chair Rep. Ann Bolin, that statutory deadline was put into place because Governor Whitmer essentially took out the roads bond after the legislature did not agree to the 45-cent tax increase. And she did this after they had agreed on the budget. And so this statutory deadline was to prevent the governor from messing with what the legislature had agreed on before the constitutional deadline. And yes, largely it has worked. It seems like this year, the House and the Senate do not want to play nice with one another and aren't really willing to come to the table because both sides believe that they are stopping terrible, horrible things on the other side.
Colin, your read.
I mean, it's hard to disagree with Elena there. The House and the Senate clearly are not playing nice. And at this point, we're long past the statutory deadline. I think one of the main issues is just this started off wrong, right? Back in the spring, winter time, House Republicans passed maybe their fullest budget proposal so far, which they described as a stopgap spending measure to prevent a shutdown, taking a shutdown off the table by funding some parts of state government with base level funding. Back then, that was panned by Democrats, right? So you fast forward till now, and you have House Republicans consistently saying, we want to pass an education plan and a road funding plan first. You have Senate Democrats consistently saying we need to see a full budget proposal. The House hadn't unveiled that full budget proposal on time. It's clear that it's still going to take a minute before we get the rest of those budget proposals. I think it's just a matter of timing and priorities right now. And really the priorities for the House and for the governor's office, for that matter, have been road funding, while the Senate's priorities have been a full budget. And now we're approaching September 30th. And who knows who's going to swear first.
And Colin, I think it's interesting you said that, it started bad. In the press conference with Hall, we had a hearkening back to the Senate is suing him over those 9 bills that never got transmitted. So I think that just underscores that point there, that the relationship between the House and the Senate and the priorities started off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, there's been a few lawsuits, and Matt Hall does like to refer to those in public statements that sort of set the table for what the relationship is like. And now Speaker Matt Hall is calling for negotiations to be just between him and Governor Whitmer. Matt Hall for the Republicans, Gretchen Whitmer for the Democrats. He says, this will be done right away. Here's what he had to say.
The Republicans are unified, and we can put forward one budget position, and I think the Democrats would be best served to iron out their differences, empower Governor Whitmer to lead you, and we'll get a budget done very fast.
So, Elena, would that ever happen?
The governor does not vote on the budget. The Senate still needs to be a part of negotiations. House Democrats need to be part of negotiations because it does not seem to me House Republicans have 56 members that could vote on a budget proposal. A budget happening very soon if Matt Hall and Governor Whitmer sit down in a room. I mean, we were supposed to have a budget very soon in May, so I'm not overly optimistic about the likelihood of that.
Colin, what do you make of this latest idea from Matt Hall to just have it be him and Whitmer?
I mean, this may be the first time he's mentioned it in these terms, but this isn't a new idea. Frequently over these past months in these weekly press conferences he's been doing, he's referenced Whitmer as the de facto leader of the Democrats in Michigan, and that he's called on Senate Democrats to empower Whitmer to negotiate on their behalf in so many words. He said this various ways, but this is a consistent message that Speaker Hall has been conveying. And I think, to Elena's point, Senate Democrats, House Democrats need to be part of this negotiation. Anything that passes the House would also need to pass the Democratic-led Senate. You know, it's not the first time that Speaker Hall has tried to simplify negotiations.
By cutting people out, should we take that seriously, or do you think there's something else at play?
I think it always comes back to you can either get on the bus or go under it. I think he's trying to build momentum and trying to build power in his negotiating, strengthen his negotiating stance. Is it serious? Yeah, I think there's a level of seriousness to it. I mean, he's saying it. He's the speaker. You have to take what he says seriously when it comes to these budget negotiations, especially this late stage in the process. At the same time, if it just means Senate Democrats and House Democrats being a little more agreeable to where he and the governor are at in their positions, I mean, I think he would take that as well.
Elena, I know something that you have been thinking and wondering a lot about and questioning. Who right now is negotiating this budget?
Yes, I think that is a very big question because as I am trying to talk to subcommittee chairs about what does your budget look like, there is a hesitancy to discuss any specifics of their budget. We hear a lot about, oh, there's fraud in budgets. And I say, could you please provide an example? And they're like, well, I don't want to say because our budget isn't public yet. You know, we hear a lot about these conversations between Speaker Hall and the governor and Senate Majority Winnie Brinks, but we don't hear so much about the conversations that maybe Bullen and Anthony are having, or these subcommittee chairs. We don't see that process unfolding like we have in years past. And on background, I've had conversations with people that are saying that it's the show that belongs to the Speaker's office.
So let's bring road funding into this. Governor Whitmer has said there is no budget deal without a roads funding plan. It seems like there's some tension there between the governor and the state Senate Democrats.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. She put out a statement urging again for a roads plan to happen and warning of the funding cliff that this state is approaching with the end of the bonds. And I completely agree. The Senate seems less interested in a roads deal than the House does, even House Democrats, who did vote for a version of a roads plan earlier this year. I think in terms of kind of negotiating the budget process, that might be where we see the House and the governor's office more closely aligned, and something that it does seem the governor is trying to get the Senate to move on. However, I don't see a budget that doesn't increase revenue somewhere for roads getting approved by Senate Dems or even House Dems for that matter.
You know, Whitmer said as much last month. She said a budget isn't done until a roads deal is done. And so you can read between the lines there what that means for the likelihood of something getting passed without a roads deal as part of that.
That is Colin Jackson, Capitol reporter at the Michigan Public Radio Network, and Elena Dernbaugh, assistant editor at Gongwer News Service. Elena, complicating all of this is this new report that came out from the Citizens Research Council that shows the One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed in D.C., signed into law by President Trump, could actually pull away $1.1 billion from the state budget in this upcoming fiscal year alone. That is only going to complicate matters when it comes to negotiations.
100%. I mean, we still have Speaker Hall saying that the budget for the upcoming fiscal year will be smaller than last year's budget and that it will provide $3.1 billion for a roads plan and will cover no taxes on tips. It'll cover the rollback of the personal income tax and it will include all of these things. But we have reports that are saying that the state has $1 billion to backfill due to losses from federal funding that's going to affect Medicaid and people's health coverage. So the math does not seem to math.
But Colin, Hall continues to say, we're going to keep moving forward with the numbers that we internally want to use in the House.
Yeah, but again, Hall is only one part of a three-leg stool with the Senate and the governor's office. So if he wants to assert this reality or the numbers that they have in the House, he needs to get the governor's office and the Senate to agree to that. Otherwise, we're still at this standstill. And so the question is, are they going to call another CREC? These are all questions that remain to be answered.
I think they all need to decide what version of reality we're living in.
Exactly.
And a revenue conference, which is what Colin was just talking about, could help resolve that by giving everyone a common number to work with, which is under law what they're supposed to do. But Matt Hall does not seem to be interested in establishing that common number at this point. What do we make of that?
Interestingly, back in May, when it was starting to become evident that we were going to have some issues with the budget and that federal funding was going to have a significant effect on how much money we were working with, Representative Al-Abbas Farhat, who was formerly the minority vice chair of House Appropriations, said he would be interested in calling a September CREC to figure out what was going on. He has since been removed from that position, and the speaker doesn't seem interested. So I think that would suggest that there are people who are thinking in that direction, but the speaker isn't really willing to listen to those people at this point in time.
Colin, as we sort through the politics, there's also real-world implications. What are the consequences that people are staring down right now 6 weeks in?
I think the consequences are most starkly being felt by the school districts right now who are preparing to go back to school in a couple of weeks and still don't know a budget. They still don't know what they're going to have to work with as far as per pupil allotment, how their services are going to be paid for, etc. And, we recently saw Representative Brixey talking about the Okemos School District, where I actually went, saying that they were no longer able to provide free school meals. And speaking from my own personal experience, this is a well-off area. And so if this school district with not the most struggling tax base is saying, hey, we're having trouble paying for school meals and some of these services and having to cut back, what are some of these other districts that may not have as many resources doing right now? And how are they getting by without a state budget?
A few weeks ago, we talked with Republican Representative Tim Kelly on the show. He chairs the subcommittee in the House that oversees the K through 12 education budget. I want to take a quick listen to something that he said in that conversation.
Clearly, all sides have, looked past the tripwire of July 1. I think that we're looking now at how do we stave off a shutdown at this point.
It doesn't feel like any movement has happened since then. In fact, maybe even going backwards, as we noted about this removal of a Democrat from the Appropriations Committee. What are we watching for in the next few weeks?
I think one of the things that will be interesting to see is how much further along does government shutdown talk get, Back in February, March, when the House passed its shutdown prevention plan, they were saying, I'm not saying shutdown, you're saying shutdown, right? And Democrats were saying, if you're worried about a shutdown, just present your budget proposals like we are. If that doesn't happen anytime soon, I think that the likelihood of a shutdown or something coming close to a shutdown increases day by day, week by week.
Oh, absolutely. And it's happened before, and we could see it happen again.
So, Elena, in the final minute or so that we have left, I want to turn the same question to you. What are you going to be watching for over the next few weeks when we all have this looming October 1st now deadline moving towards the front of everyone's minds?
Yeah, I am going to be looking out for the lines people are drawing in the sand. As Colin mentioned earlier this year, there was a lot of finger pointing. You said shut down. No, you said shut down. But now we're starting to hear people say, no, maybe a shutdown is a good thing. We heard that from Senator Roger Victory. So who is drawing lines and what are those lines being drawn over? And I'm also going to be watching to see if there's any movement in subcommittees. Are we going to see a House budget before we get to the end of September and do the big budget? Are we going to get any House proposal?
That is Elena Dernbaugh, assistant editor at Gongwer News Service, and Colin Jackson, Capitol reporter at the Michigan Public Radio Network. Thanks so much for the time, you two.
Thanks, guys.
Happy to chat.
Thanks for having us.
And Rick, before we go, I realized we've mentioned now a few times over the past few weeks these budget shutdowns in the past. It feels like maybe now would be a good time to just quickly remember when that was, what happened, why they happened.
Yeah, most recently, the ones we keep alluding to are these two very, very short government shutdowns that happened in 2007 and 2009.
Jennifer Granholm was governor, a Democrat. There was a Democratic House and a Republican-controlled Senate.
Right, like today, divided government.
Yeah, and there was also the Great Recession. Massive economic challenges when the state was hemorrhaging money, and massive cuts to the budget would have to be made, or revenue was going to have to be increased.
Because constitutionally, the legislature has to pass and the governor has to sign a balanced budget by the start of the new fiscal year, which is October 1st.
In 2007, there was a more than $1 billion budget deficit. In 2009, it was even larger. And both times, Granholm and lawmakers, they went past the midnight deadline. But then something about sort of going past it hurried things up. A plan was figured out just hours later.
It was almost like the reality had to set in, even if it was for just a few hours, for the pressure to build enough to make a deal.
Rick, I remember you were at the Capitol late into the night, both those nights.
Yes, I was. And everyone just watched the clock as midnight came and went. I remember Granholm, like you said, a Democrat, and Republican Senate Majority Leader Mike Bishop just standing next to each other, silently watching midnight come and go. And at the same time, all across the state, campers at state campgrounds were told they had to leave. At midnight, lottery ticket sales stopped. Michigan has some drawbridges that were raised and locked in the up position. There were fewer state police road patrols. Most of the folks at home probably just slept through it, but we did get a glimpse of a shutdown, or actually a partial shutdown.
And here we are now more than a decade later, and it just sort of feels like, again, that this pressure still has to build on lawmakers as October 1st gets closer and closer for this sense of urgency to really set in again.
Yeah.
And for those real political junkies who've got it bad, if you want to go back and listen to some of the reports, the stories from those shutdowns, we are going to link to them at the website michiganpublic.org/itsjustpolitics. And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.